Sick. Sick for 2 weeks. I'm sick of being sick. And I know what else that y'all are sick of. Sick of me not talking about the worst albums of 2017. In fact, it's been this long. Well, here it is. It's time for us to do it. Because just because I'm sick doesn't mean that these 10 piles of sick are going to go away. 2017 was a really strange year. It was one where a lot of these names, well, some of them you would expect, but some of the others you're actually kind of surprised that they're here. Believe me, as we go through the list, that'll make a lot more sense. Now, every one of these albums, except for one, was something that got an official review on the channel. And the one that didn't is because it was just a couple of weeks back. Believe me, it's bad. So, let's just, try to preserve my voice as long as possible. I know that's probably not going to happen, but let's go. Here are the 10 worst albums of 2017. And we start with number 10. Number 10 was one that happened very early in the year, which was Suicide Silence's self-titled album. This was one that a lot of people were expecting to be, maybe kind of middling, but it was one that ended up being pretty bad. Suicide Silence is a recognizable name within the deathcore community, but this was one that almost transitioned over into some nu metal territory. They simplified the sound a little bit. They tried to go with the whole brutal aspect. Some people love that, but let me tell you something. Whenever you consider some of their, classics from back in the day, if you really want to call them that, this is one that just really pales in comparison. Not a lot of kinesis, not a lot of motion. It was one that just felt really drab and uninspired. And then, of course, the band decided that if you didn't like them, they were going to try to fight you. Or at least that's what they said. So yeah, I guess you could add in some brownie points for them just generally being immature. Because, that's a lot of something that's happened in 2017. Take a look at some of the things that happened on this channel. Number 9, Motionless in White with Graveyard Shift. Now, I've heard a lot of contrasting opinions about this album, and maybe this is something where I just need to admit that Motionless in White is not a band that I fully get. But I've reviewed albums of theirs in the past, and they've really shown the ability to really, engage their listening fan base and everything like that. But this album felt like it didn't have a lot of those key and critical elements that were available on some of the albums in the past. And I have, of course, praised a couple of their songs. Graveyard Shift just felt like it had a lot of the more subpar material on here that was able to kind of do its job, but at its core, the lyricism as well as just some of the music felt a bit average at best, and whenever you compare that to the whole entire package not feeling very solid, then you have yourself an album that just didn't feel like one of the best of the year. In fact, it feels very much like it could be on this list. It also feels like it could sort of be on the outside looking in, but it's at number 9. Number 8 is Marilyn Manson with Heaven Upside Down. This was an album that really, for Marilyn Manson having the opportunity, being independent, to essentially do whatever he wants, he really dropped the ball, or at least maybe this is just Marilyn Manson showing his age a little bit, as this album felt really lifeless. It felt like Marilyn was simply on autopilot throughout this entire affair. A lot of the stuff feels like it was attempted, little tongue-in-cheek humor or offense just for the sake of it, and all of it at this point in time just feels like it just doesn't have the same effect or the same punch. Perhaps it was the fact that it was a little bit more direct, and it wasn't something that was sort of mired around some really strong lyricism or something that was built around some really strong musicianship. The whole entire package just felt very uninspired, very dull, almost as though this was an album that was released just to simply release an album. And Manson has not exactly had the best of years, considering some of the other things that have happened during shows and, off the record. So, yeah. Not exactly a great experience. There have been some other folks that have looked into this in a little bit more depth. Seek them out if you want to understand why this has been such a bad year for Marilyn Manson. Number 7 is Danzig with Black Laden Crown. Again, this was an example of a guy who was able to inspire us back in 2010-ish with an album, and now, all of a sudden, just sort of drops the ball. Danzig's voice, for one, is something that could be critiqued a bit, showcasing that it does have a little bit of age behind it. But really, once again, what makes this such a bad album is really the strength, or really the lack thereof of strength, of material on the album itself. The whole thing kind of just meanders and chimes in every once in a while, leaving you kind of feeling bored by the end of this. It's an album by an artist that has been able to deliver classics in the past, and it's just simply laid a goose egg. Now, of course, this is the second goose egg in a row for Danzig, who had a covers album that was pretty poor a year or two back, as I recall, but this one, being a full length, just was not really what we were expecting. Number 6 is Arch Enemy with Will to Power. Oh, good lord, this album. This is one where the talents of Jeff Loomis of Nevermore are now a part of this band that already had and boasted a lot of talent, and yet this felt so incredibly run-of-the-mill and so incredibly basic melodic death metal 101 that it was absolutely absurd. Now, we have documented that Arch Enemy's material has really kind of gone downhill throughout the course of the 2000s, and then really had the potential with the new singer here in the 20-teens to potentially rise back up as new ideas were really added into the mix. Unfortunately speaking, the person that they need to add a little bit more into the mix is Jeff himself. Jeff Loomis needs to be a little bit more a part of this creative process. They need to let him in and do a little bit more and not hold him hostage. Yeah, I said the word hostage. Read into that what you want. But what we got here is an album that it felt like it had absolutely nothing to offer, that it was just sort of like the Marilyn Manson release. It was an album that was released for releasing an album's sake. There is no will to power. There's no will for anything. The only thing I have the will to do with this album is sleep. Number 5, Operation Mindcrime with New Reality. Now, this has been an interesting project to say the least for Jeff Tate, and this is the third part of his Resurrection trilogy, and the first one really showed a lot of great potential. And with the second one, it was kind of a goose egg. It felt very much like a transitional album between the first and the third, and that was very somewhat excusable. However, with this album, there is no excuse. I don't know what Jeff was really even attempting to do with this record. Now, Jeff has a fantastic voice that has certainly whittled a little bit. However, at times, he's trying to go into Roger Waters-style territory, and Roger didn't exactly have a great album this year either, but it narrowly avoided this list. And he's trying to just go with something very calm and subdued, and then in other instances, he tries to go for something that has a little bit more kinesis and fails miserably. Everything here is just a jumbled heap of a mess! How in the world did this trilogy somehow go off the rails so fast and so quickly after having such a great first album? It seemed like maybe that Jeff just had way too many ideas, and those ideas didn't exactly translate into maybe what his head was manifesting. That all of those ideas that perhaps he shelved for later, he returned to and realized, shit, all these great ideas I had, where did they go? And whenever they went to the building process, they kind of just threw anything together and saw exactly what came from it, which is the new reality, which is same as the old reality, but Jeff Tate's still making bad music. Number 4, All That Remains with Madness. The sad tale of All That Remains just continues. And the problem is that All That Remains transitioning into more of a modern metal act isn't a problem. Them being more of a radio metal act isn't a problem at all. None of that is actually a problem. The problem is that the material within the modern metal version of All That Remains, the material within the radio metal version of All That Remains, is just not good. It doesn't have a lot of that magic spark that makes some of those modern metal bands that you hear on the radio, such as your Volbeats, or some would even argue Five Finger Death Punch, that gives them that personality, that gives them that pop, that causes you to gravitate a lot more toward them. It's just material that feels a little bit more like a copy pasta or a copycat, instead of having something that's truly unique or truly stands out. And that's a problem. That's a problem. That was one of the things that made All That Remains one of the premier metalcore bands, was the fact that their sound felt like it had a little bit more aggression, a little bit more riffs aplenty. And that was what caused them to stand out with bands like Killswitch Engage and early As I Lay Dying and, Shadows Fall, and created a whole entire subgenre that we still have. But this is not good, and it will continue to not being good until this band realizes that they cannot just sit in a studio and autopilot write songs. They instead need to sit back and think about what they can do to make themselves a little bit more different. Number 3 is Linkin Park with One More Light. Now, yes, there's going to be major debate here. Well, you said this was terrible. This is probably the worst album of the year, blah, blah, blah. Now it's only number 3. It's probably because of Chester's death, isn't it? Well, no. One thing that definitely does come to light is the fact that One More Light was definitely a cry for help. And it does help bring a little bit more context to this album. However, it doesn't save this album from still being very mediocre, very boring, very lackluster, pop music that was somewhat marketed to a metal audience, which is very, very strange and very, very interesting, to say the least. This was Linkin Park deciding to go completely off the rails, which that by itself isn't a reason that it's a bad album, considering they had always stated that they could go and produce a thrash metal album and then do a Coldplay-style album. That's something that they've stated for 10 years. If you didn't know that, look it the fuck up. It's just the fact that this album's real kinesis was... there was none. There was absolutely none. We were stuck in autopilot 0. We were stuck on the ground, and there was glue on our feet so we couldn't move. We were in one simple location, both emotionally and just musically. Now, there were moments here and there where the album tries to paint itself with a little bit more of a positive glow, or at least give us a little bit of a veneer of actual, change, but it was not nearly frequent enough, and that's the problem. Rest in peace to Chester Bennington. Yes, that's still very true. However, this is still an album that's going to go down, if it happens to be Linkin Park's last, as easily their worst. Number 2, Nickelback with Feed the Machine. I really didn't want to put this on this list, but I have to, mainly for the fact that we were all kind of deceived. Feed the Machine as a song, whenever it was released earlier this year, really showed us that Nickelback had the opportunity to write a song that had a lot of ass. And this is a band that, honestly, for all the shit that it gets, does produce a pretty decent song every once in a while. They're not the worst band on planet Earth. That's just a meme. They're a memeable band. They're always going to be. But this is an album, unfortunately, that after this song just had absolutely no momentum, considering it went up and down, up and down, up and down. They decided that they didn't decide what they wanted to do next. They just threw things together like some sort of unholy smorgasbord of stupidity. We had an arena rock song here. Then we had something that even had some country twinge to it. Then we had a straight-up rock song. Then we have the trademark Nickelback ballad that they can sing to all the people, and the girls can look at their boyfriends and be like, "Thank you for taking me to the Nickelback concert I'm going to put out tonight." And he's just like, "Yeah," and then rape happens or whatever. I don't know. This is just not a good album because of that tragic imbalance that occurs between what we got with the lead single and what we got with the rest of the album. The rest of the album had absolutely nothing to do with that single. The single was merely a red herring that made us all think that potentially this could have some actual value to it, and then it had no value to it whatsoever. And that brings us to number 1. Speaking of absolutely no value whatsoever, can you believe it? Can you really believe this? I mean, this is a band that's considered to be legendary. But yet for the last 3 years, we have talked about one of their albums at the top of this stinking list, and I'm getting tired of it. I'm as sick of talking about these guys at number 1 as I am of being sick right now. And that's 6 Feet Under, or as I'm going to call them, Sick Feet Under. Get them sick and put them under. Torment. This is a great metaphor not only for the album cover, which was, what the fuck was it? But it was also a fitting metaphor for the music itself. What was actually packaged? It was torment to listen to. Do I need to say much more? Is there much more that needs to be uttered? This is just a band that continues to crap out material. They continue to claim to have ideas, but I don't hear them. It just sounds like they look at the old stuff and say, okay, well, let's put an extra note right there, or I'll write different lyrics. This is still one of the laziest, one of the worst bands of right now, of 2017, of the 2010s, of recent times. This is a band that is just shitting out material that needs to just stay inside their heads. Either that or just be on a reel somewhere as a B-side to be released in some shitty, B-sides release that will probably end up happening anyway, because there's probably still B-sides. There's C-sides, there's D-sides. There's 7 more albums coming, I bet you. There's 10 more albums coming. 2018 is going to be the year of 6 Feet Under, where there's going to be 6 albums for us to listen to, and each and every one of them is not going to get any more than a 6 out of 30. Hell, they might not get a 6 out of 100 if we were still using that. Heck, they're definitely not going to get a 6 out of 10, and if I did things out of 6, they wouldn't get a 6 out of 6. They would get a .06 out of 6. 6 Feet Under right now is a band that has 3 options. They can continue what they're doing and continue to get some mediocre sales from folks that continue to believe that this band is contributing, or they can just break up. You know which one they're going to choose. So, expect 2018 for us to go 4 for 4 if they happen to release something. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the 10 worst albums of 2017. I think this actually made me worse. I'm sweating like a pig. I feel like I'm on the sun, and I feel like I'm surrounded by literal shit. Probably because we just talked about it. If you felt that there were any albums that were missed, let me know in the comments below. If you think that I'm just an asshole, then you bet to yourself, because I already know. I'll talk to you guys next time. I'm coverkillernation. Later.